The bustling city park buzzed with life. Children's laughter mingling with the hum of traffic, the aroma of street food wafting through the air. Marcus Reed walked along the park's edge, a quiet satisfaction on his face after volunteering at a community tech workshop. His hoodie fluttered gently in the breeze as he headed home, blending into the familiar streets he called his own. But peace shattered when the sudden flash of red and blue lights lit up behind him. The sharp blare of a siren cut through the afternoon calm, freezing Marcus in his tracks. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay composed, years of learned restraint kicking in. A police cruiser screeched to a halt, its tires skidding against the pavement. Two officers emerged, Rick Daniels, gruff and hard-eyed, already carrying judgment in his gaze, and Brian Kessler, younger and hesitant, lingering near the car with conflicted eyes. Daniels's voice barked through the thick summer air. "Hey, you! Stop right there." Marcus sighed quietly, adjusting his stance to keep his hands visible. "Everything okay, officer?" he asked, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his chest. Daniels strode closer, scanning Marcus as if searching for a crime written on his skin. "We got a call about a robbery suspect," Daniels said coldly. "You fit the description." Marcus's jaw clenched. "And what description is that exactly?" he asked, keeping his tone measured. Daniels's eyes narrowed. "Black hoodie, dark jeans, tall. Sound familiar?" The accusation hung heavy in the air. Marcus resisted the urge to respond with sarcasm. He knew better. By now, a few curious onlookers had gathered, their murmurs blending with the fading hum of the park. Marcus inhaled sharply, forcing his voice to remain calm. "I just left a community workshop. I'm not who you're looking for." Daniel sneered. "Yeah? Got witnesses to back that up?" Marcus gestured toward the park. "Plenty, or you can check the cameras at the rec center." The crowd's whispers grew louder as more people pulled out smartphones, their cameras glinting in the sunlight. "Why are they messing with him?" one onlooker muttered. "We've seen this story before," another said grimly. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he stood tall, his father's voice echoing in his mind. "Never let them strip your dignity, son. Stay calm." Daniel stepped closer, his face twisted with authority. "Got a real smart mouth, huh? Maybe you want to take a ride downtown?" Marcus's pulse quickened, but he didn't flinch. "I'm just walking home, officer. That's not a crime." Kessler shifted uneasily, glancing between Daniels and the growing crowd. "Rick, maybe we should—" Kessler began, but Daniels cut him off sharply. "Stay out of this, Kessler." The murmurs swelled. Among the crowd, a young white woman with fierce determination in her eyes stepped forward. Lila Thompson's heart raced, but she knew she couldn't stay silent. Locking eyes with Marcus, she saw the quiet strength he was clinging to. "This man did nothing wrong," she said firmly. "I saw the whole thing." Daniels's glare darkened as he turned to her. "Step back, lady. This ain't your business." Lila's voice didn't waver. "It is now." The crowd, emboldened by her courage, murmured in agreement. Kessler's hand dropped from his holster, guilt heavy in his eyes. The balance of power began to shift. Marcus stood rooted in place, locking eyes with Lila in an unspoken understanding, a fragile but powerful alliance against injustice. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The crowd's presence grew stronger, their voices forming a wall of solidarity. "Leave him alone," someone shouted. Daniels looked around, the scrutiny sinking in. He took a reluctant step back, his authority faltering. "You got lucky today," he muttered, gesturing for Kessler to follow him back to the cruiser. The siren wailed faintly as they drove off, leaving behind a galvanized community. Lila approached Marcus, her face resolute. "Are you okay?" she asked. Marcus nodded. Yeah, thanks to you. Turning to the crowd, he spoke with quiet conviction. We're stronger together, don't forget that. Faces filled with a mixture of relief and determination nodded back. As the park slowly returned to its rhythm, the echoes of the encounter lingered, a reminder that dignity and justice must be fought for, even in the face of prejudice. Marcus stood still, his heart racing as the harsh words of Officer Daniels sliced through the tense afternoon air. The accusation, unfounded, unjust, struck him like a physical blow. He'd been here before, felt this sting 1,000 times. The flashbacks hit him like a wave. The rude stares, the unwarranted stops, the whispers of suspicion. But this time, he wouldn't let the sting break him. He swallowed hard, his mind replaying his father's voice, calm and firm. Never let them strip your dignity. You fit the description of a robbery suspect, Daniels barked, stepping forward, his eyes narrowing with judgment. Marcus didn't flinch. He'd rehearsed this moment in his head too many times. What description? He asked, voice steady. Despite the knot in his stomach, Daniels' lips curled into a sneer. Black hoodie, dark jeans, tall. You telling me that's not you? Marcus locked eyes with the officer, unwavering. I'm just walking home. I'm not a suspect. Behind him, the growing crowd murmured, their voices rising in quiet protest. Phones were pulled out, recording the entire exchange, capturing the injustice as it unfolded in real time. Their eyes were fixed on him, waiting for him to make a mistake, waiting for him to give them a reason to escalate. But Marcus stayed, calm. He had no intention of giving them that satisfaction. Daniel's voice grew colder, more demanding. Face down on the pavement, now. He gestured sharply with his hand, a command, an order meant to strip Marcus of his autonomy. Marcus's muscles tightened, his pulse quickening, but he remained still, meeting Daniels's gaze. The weight of the demand hit him, an unfair expectation to comply with an officer's authority despite the absence of any wrongdoing. He thought of his father's words again. Stand tall. Don't give them a reason. I'm not doing that, Marcus said firmly, his voice calm but resolute. The officer took a step closer, his breath heavy with disdain. What's that? You think you're too good to follow orders? The words stung, but Marcus refused to let them shake him. His anger simmered beneath the surface, but he held it in check. He couldn't afford to lose control, not now. He couldn't afford to give in to the humiliation. Not when so many had already been crushed by it. From the corner of his eye, he noticed the crowd growing. Their murmurs turned into louder whispers of dissent. A few voices rose up, some muttering, "This is wrong," while others just watched helpless but angry. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, a collective force pushing against the officer's oppressive stance. But the real weight was in the silence, his silence, and his refusal to comply. Lila Thompson stood at the edge of the crowd, heart hammering in her chest. She watched the scene unfold, her pulse quickening with each passing moment. Her mind screamed at her to stay out of it, to avoid the confrontation. She was just a teacher, not someone who could make a difference in this kind of situation. But the longer she stood there, the harder it became to ignore the injustice before her. She saw the way the officer loomed over Marcus, how his posture exuded authority, even when it was built on nothing but prejudice. She knew she couldn't remain a bystander, not when someone's humanity was being stripped away in front of her. This isn't just his fight, she thought. It's mine too. I have to do something. Lila's breath caught in her throat as she made her decision. Stepping forward, she pushed through the crowd, her eyes fixed on the officers. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger as she approached them. This man did nothing wrong. she said, her words clear and unwavering. "I saw the whole thing." The officers froze. Marcus's head turned slightly, surprised by the voice that had cut through the tension. Daniel's glare shifted toward Lila, his jaw tight. "Stay out of this, lady," he growled. "This doesn't concern you." But Lila's feet were already planted, her resolve hardening. She wasn't backing down. "It does concern me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm a witness, and I won't stay silent." For a moment, the crowd seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with tension, but Lila's words had sparked something. The murmurs grew louder, the collective outrage swelling like a wave. A few voices shouted in agreement, "Let him go." Daniel sneered, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the gathering witnesses. The phone cameras, the growing chorus of discontent, they were starting to have an effect. The walls of his authority were crumbling brick by brick. "Get out of the way, lady," Daniels ordered, his hand moving toward his holster, ready to bring the situation to a new level. His eyes narrowed as he sized Lila up. "I'll arrest you for obstruction if you don't move." Lila's pulse pounded in her ears, but she didn't move. She could feel the weight of her privilege in the moment, her whiteness giving her a platform others didn't have, but she couldn't let that stop her. "No," she said, her voice steady now. "You're not arresting anyone." The crowd grew louder, voices rising in defiance. "This is wrong," they chanted, their collective power giving Marcus a strength he hadn't felt moments before. Lila's stand had emboldened them, their voices echoing in the streets. Kessler, standing back, his hand gripping the radio tight, couldn't ignore the weight of the moment any longer. His conscience clawed at him. He had seen the way Daniels had treated Marcus, how his actions were steeped in prejudice. Kessler's hesitation was a silent battle, a tug of war between loyalty to his partner and his own sense of right and wrong. Daniels glared at the crowd, his face flushed with frustration. He made no move toward his handcuffs, knowing the eyes of the community were upon him. Lila stood firm, her heart pounding in her chest. "This man did nothing wrong," she repeated, her voice unwavering. "Let him go." The words hung in the air like a challenge. A ripple of defiance moved through the crowd, a unified force pushing back against the injustice. Marcus's chest swelled with emotion, gratitude, relief, and something else, something deeper. A reminder that no matter how hard they tried to break him, there was always strength in standing together. Lila had taken the first step, and now the crowd had found its voice. The battle wasn't over, but it had shifted. They weren't just witnesses anymore. They were part of the story, and that Marcus knew was a victory in itself. Daniels took a step toward Lila, his voice a low growl. "Step back, lady. You don't know what you're messing with." His eyes were cold, narrowing as he sized her up, clearly underestimating the power she was about to wield. But Lila stood her ground. Her heart raced in her chest, but her body didn't move an inch. She had seen this too many times before, this same unflinching display of authority, the same injustice played out over and over. She wasn't going to let it happen again, not on her watch. "I'm not going anywhere," Lila said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'm a witness to what's happening here, and I won't let you intimidate me into silence." Behind her, the murmurs in the crowd shifted from uncertainty to determination. The onlookers, who had been holding their breath in the shadows, began to find their voices. One by one, they started speaking up. "Leave him alone!" shouted a man from the back of the crowd. "Yeah, this isn't right." Another voice rang out, followed by a chorus of others. The momentum built slowly at first, but it was undeniable. The group that had once been passive, uncertain in the face of authority, was now forming a wall of defiance. Their collective voice rose, a growing symphony of outrage, their words sharp and piercing as they all began to echo Lila's stand. Daniel's grip on his baton tightened, but the confidence he had moments ago started to waver. His eyes darted from one face to the next in the crowd, and for the first time, he seemed unsure. He had always held the upper hand, his uniform, his badge, his position. But now, surrounded by a sea of people who refused to be silent, he felt his power slip away. Kessler, standing off to the side, watched it all unravel. His hand hovered over his holster, instinct and training urging him to maintain control, but something in him shifted. He could see it in the crowd. He could hear it in their voices, and he could feel the weight of his own conscience pressing harder with every passing second. His eyes flicked from Daniels, his partner, who stood there glaring, to the faces in the crowd, the faces of people who were finally standing up. Kessler had been a part of this system for so long, a system built on injustice, and now he was torn. He could feel the guilt knotting in his stomach, the weight of every moment he had let slide, every injustice he had ignored. He glanced back at Daniels, who was tightening his jaw, trying to regain control. But Kessler couldn't ignore it anymore. His fingers twitched, and without another thought, he lowered his hand from his holster, his resolve breaking. The shift was palpable. The crowd took a collective breath, their energy surging. Daniel's eyes flashed with fury as Kessler made his choice, but there was nothing he could do. He had lost the battle, not just to the crowd, but to his own partner. Marcus, still on the ground, locked eyes with Lila. The connection was immediate, profound, unspoken. In that brief moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. There were no more officers, no more bystanders. There was just Marcus and Lila. Two people fighting the same fight. Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude flood him. She had stood up when no one else had. She had stepped forward when it would have been easier to look away. Lila took a deep breath, her voice trembling but steady as she faced Daniels. "I know the laws," she said firmly, her words carrying the weight of truth. "What you're doing here is wrong. You're violating police misconduct laws by profiling him like this, and I'm going to make sure this gets reported." The words cut through the tension like a knife. Daniel's sneer faltered. For the first time, he seemed unsure, as if Lila's defiance had pierced the armor of his arrogance. The crowd grew louder, chanting now, their voices a force in the air, a tangible push against the officer's authority. "This is wrong, let him go." Marcus's chest tightened as he listened to the chant. It was a chorus of support, but also a reminder that this wasn't just about him. This was about the community, about people coming together, rising up, and making their voices heard. Daniels took a step back, his mouth opening, but no words came out. His eyes flicked over to Kessler, but there was no support there. The tide had turned. His bravado was unraveling in real time, and he had no choice but to retreat. Lila extended her hand to Marcus. His breath caught as he took it, letting her help him to his feet. He stood tall, despite the sting of the humiliation. The pavement beneath him felt solid, but it was the strength of the crowd, the solidarity that had lifted him, that gave him the true sense of power. His dignity, which had been threatened moments ago, was intact. He took a deep breath, his voice ringing out, steady and sure. "Thank you. We're stronger together," he said, his words carrying over the crowd. Response was immediate. Cheers erupted, a wave of triumph, of victory. The community had stood up, had made its voice heard. And in that moment, the air around them seemed to shift. What had started as an act of racial profiling had transformed into something much greater, a testament to courage, to standing together, to fighting against injustice no matter the cost. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt hope stirring in his chest. It wasn't just about this moment, about what had happened here today. It was about the future, about the change that could come when people refused to stay silent, when they stood united. The crowd was still chanting, their voices growing louder, their sense of hope and solidarity growing stronger with every passing second. And for Marcus, Lila, and everyone watching, there was no mistaking it. Change was possible when they stood together. And the fight for justice would continue, louder, stronger, and unyielding. The news had spread like wildfire. What happened that day was now everywhere. People were talking about it at work, in cafes, on social media, on TV. The video had gone viral, and every person who saw it seemed to have an opinion. The first time Marcus saw himself on the screen, his heart raced. It wasn't just his face bruised and hurt. It was the way the camera lingered on the officers, their smugness, their power, their disregard for human dignity. He had no words for how it felt to see himself in that way, to relive it all over again. But he knew what he had to do. He stood, tall before the microphone at a press conference, his voice calm but firm, piercing through the noise that had been building around him. "This isn't just about me," he began, glancing around at the crowd. "This is about every single person who's been looked at like they don't matter, who's been profiled because of the color of their skin. This isn't an isolated incident. This is happening every single day, and we need to start talking about it. And we need to do something about it." The reporters were all focused, leaning in, waiting for his next words. Marcus took a deep breath and continued, "Racial profiling has no place in our society. We have to hold those in power accountable. And we must stand together, black, white, every color, because we are all affected by this injustice." A local news anchor asked, "What would you like to see happen now?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I want justice. I want to make sure this never happens again to anyone. We need reform. We need change." His words resonated far beyond the reporters, in front of him, sparking conversations across the city, even beyond. People were angry. People were hopeful. People were demanding change. Lila watched the broadcast from her living room, her heart heavy but proud. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind. She had faced countless questions, judgments from some people she thought she could trust. Her colleagues at the law firm, her friends, some of them questioned her actions. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," they said. "You don't know what you're doing. It's not your place." But none of that had shaken her. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror one night, staring at her own reflection, fighting back tears. "You did the right thing," she whispered to herself, wiping away a tear. "You did." The words didn't always feel true in the face of the criticism, but they were the only words she had. She couldn't take them back, and she wouldn't. This was her stand, and she wasn't going to apologize for it. Meanwhile, Kessler sat alone, in his car, the incident replaying in his mind over and over. He had tried to push it aside, to ignore it, to pretend it didn't matter, but he couldn't. His conscience kept gnawing at him. The look in Marcus's eyes, the powerlessness of the crowd, the way Daniels had looked at him when he hesitated, waiting for Kessler to fall in line. He slammed his fist against the steering wheel, his frustration spilling out. He had sworn an oath to serve and protect, but was that really what he had done that day? Protect? Or had he just stood by, silent and complicit? It took days for Kessler to find the courage, but finally he walked into his superior's office. "I need to file a formal complaint against Officer Daniels," Kessler said, his voice low but resolute. What happened was wrong. He abused his authority. The superior looked up at him, taken aback. "You're sure about this, Kessler?" "I'm sure," Kessler answered without hesitation. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Daniels wasn't fired on the spot, but it was a step. The department launched an investigation, and Daniels was placed on suspension, pending further review. The news wasn't easy to hear, but Marcus felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Justice was slow, but it was happening. Change was beginning. A week later, Marcus hosted a community workshop. It was his way of channeling everything he had been through into something positive. He wasn't going to be silent anymore. He wanted to help people understand their rights, to educate them, to empower them so they didn't have to feel like victims in these situations. His voice, once filled with anger and frustration, had found a new purpose. Education. There's power in knowledge, Marcus told the group. When you know your rights, they can't take that from you. They can try to strip everything else away, but they can't take that. The crowd nodded, their faces brightening with hope. One by one, people stood up, sharing their stories, their experiences. Marcus listened. He heard the pain in their voices, but he also heard the resolve. He wasn't alone, and he wasn't going to stop until he saw real change. The final event came. A community rally, a call for justice. Marcus and Lila stood side by side, their journey from strangers to allies now a powerful symbol of unity. The crowd was electric, filled with people of every background, every color, chanting together, "Justice for all." Marcus took the microphone, his heart pounding in his chest. "We're not victims," he said, his voice rising with the energy of the crowd. "We're change makers, and change is coming. It starts with us, standing together, refusing to be silent." Lila stood next to him, her hand on his shoulder, her own voice strong. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We will fight for justice, for equality, for a future where our children don't have to face what we've faced." The crowd cheered, the chants growing louder. "Justice for all," they shouted again and again, their collective voice shaking the ground beneath them. It wasn't just a rally, it was a movement, a turning point. As the night fell, the energy from the rally didn't fade. It lingered in the air, carried by the people who believed that change was possible, that justice wasn't just a dream, but a reality waiting to be claimed. The story closed on a message that had been written on every face in that crowd. Change begins with us. When we stand together, no force can break our unity, no injustice can go unchallenged.